How would it have been to go to the baths on a nice day in Rome of the year 520 AD? So 44 years after the date which is in school books generally referred to as the fall of the Roman Empire. How would that experience have been, and how would it have differed from the bathing experience during the times of the empire? Were the great baths of Rome even still functioning? Or were they already beyond repair and had started to fall into ruin? Were the baths already overgrown with greenery and the water pools empty, barren and desolate? Or were they still frequented by the Romans and still a hub of bustling activity? Well, dear friends of late Roman history, let's imagine how it must have been to go to the baths in Rome after the fall. Imagine it is a nice day in the year 520 AD, and you are one of 100 to 200,000 people who still have not given up on the old venerable city, mother of all cities, and still live in Rome, like any true Roman would. You are thinking about doing something special on your free day, one of those very rare happenings, but what to do? The Colosseum? There are rarely games held anymore at the old Amphitheatrum Flavium, only on big occasions such as celebrations of a new consulship. And then the old gladiators had been abolished decades ago. So all you can see there now are animal hunts where the venatores fight wild beasts, and even they rarely take place anymore. So there's nothing really to see there. And the old Circus Maximus? You have been there too often, you know the chariot races all too well, and they always end up in brawls between the supporters of the blues and the greens. Last time you got beaten up pretty badly when you went there, so you want to avoid that repeating. Or maybe visit one of the old temples of your forefathers? No, this is too dangerous during daylight. There are not many worshippers of the old faith left. They call you Pagani now. And one has to be very careful not to be spotted these days, because the punishments are severe. So then, the baths it shall be. Yes, a visit to the famous Roman Thermae, the old baths of Rome. Now imagine you live in region 5, near the Esquiline Hill. There are many insulae there. You cannot even fathom how it must have been in the olden days, when all the streets were full with people and all these uncountable insulae were completely occupied, every single room, often by multiple people. You have heard stories from the elders telling you how incredibly full the city was only a human lifetime ago, in their childhood, before Gaiserics and Ricimer's barbarians despoiled your magnificent Roma. Imagine you live in one of those insulae that are still occupied, while many others are empty, abandoned, and starting to wither and to decay. But the ones that are occupied are still being taken care of and maintained. So you decide to visit the baths, and since the Baths of Caracalla and of Diocletianus are so famous and everybody wants to go there, and you have been there 100 times yourself, especially to the Baths of Diocletianus, since they are not far away from where you live, you thought that it might be a nice idea to go for once to less frequented baths, to the baths on the Aventine Hill, the Thermae of Decius. Ah yes, the old Thermae on the Aventinus. You have heard stories that they were restored by Honorius about 100 years ago to repair them from damage they had received during the sack of Alaric. Honorius. Irony that it was his actions that led to the sack. Oh Rome, how much you had to suffer in the last century, you think. But fortunately, now we are under protection of our Patricius Theodericus and the empire has been reunited. There is only one emperor now in the east, and our Patricius Theodericus is his representative. And now we have had peace for almost 50 years. May that peace last a lot longer, you muse. So then you pack everything and you begin your walk from the Esquiline Hill in region 5 to the Aventine Hill in region 13, for that is where the Baths of Decius are located. On your way you pass many abandoned insula buildings, many abandoned shops, and you pass many abandoned temples. Out here in the outlying parts of the city, the decay is spreading fast, and even the edict of our venerable Patricius Theodericus to protect the old monuments of our forefathers cannot stop some people from despoiling the old monuments, looting them for building material. Despicable. What would the most magnificent Trajanus have said to that? He surely would be turning in his grave could he see that the Romans themselves despoil the magnificent monuments of their own ancestors. The Vigiles, on orders of our venerable Patricius, try their best to stop this, but alas, they are too few and they cannot be everywhere. And Rome is so very large. On the way to the Aventine Baths, you pass the Baths of Trajanus. How imposing they are, even when viewed from afar, you think. 400 years old and still as magnificent and imposing as ever. Then you pass the Templum Pacis in Region 4, the old temple that Vespasianus himself had built 450 years ago. There are many statues there in the Forum of Peace, some built by Lysippus and Phaedias themselves. The barbarians didn't take those. I guess they were too heavy, you think, with a smile. You sometimes go to the Temple of Peace to marvel at the giant plan of Rome, cut into large marble blocks, hanging at the wall. It is still standing unspoiled. Thank Jupiter that the barbarians weren't interested in city plans. You then pass the Colossus and the Amphitheatrum Flavium. How they still withstand time after hundreds of years. 36 years ago, the Amphitheatrum had been damaged by an earthquake, you heard, but the noble Praefectus Urbi Venantius Basilius had it repaired. Too bad that even animal hunts rarely happen there anymore. The last animal hunts you have seen in the Amphitheatrum were held 1 year ago during the celebrations of Eutaric's consulship. That was quite the spectacle. You then pass the Temple of Venus and Roma, which is still standing 370 years after Hadrianus himself had it built. Empty, barren, despoiled on the inside, bereft of its statues, but on the outside, giant and magnificent as ever. Time cannot touch something so mighty, you think. You then enter the Forum Romanum, still the heart of Rome. You see many people there, shopkeepers, acrobats, entertainers, senators, aristocrats and their slaves. Rome, even in these times, can still amass enough people to fill the Forum, you notice surprised. You see the Basilica Julia, damaged from fire, never repaired on the inside, yet the facade, flawless and imposing, repaired and painted to at least give a flawless outside appearance. And the Senate House. You see senators entering, wearing their togas, exactly as in the elder days. All the temples are still standing in the Forum. But the flame of Vesta doesn't burn anymore, and the doors of Janus are always closed these days, you notice sadly. You then pass the Capitolium. There you see it, the grand temple of Jupiter, still towering over the city on that hill, reminding you every day that giving up the old faith had made Jupiter angry. There are still some statues there. You had once managed to glance inside. They were covered with dust and cobwebs. But the temple roof is mostly gone. You heard stories how the Vandals tore it down because the roof tiles were made of gilded bronze. You then pass the Circus Maximus. It is old, weathered, damaged in parts, yet still standing in all its might, defying time. Now the whole population of Rome can comfortably fit inside this incredible building. You cannot even imagine how it must have been when the old Caesars ruled Rome. The palace of the Caesars, this huge structure, towering in the background over the Circus Maximus. Theodericus himself stayed there while visiting our venerable city 20 years ago, you think. But he does not come here anymore. He only stays at Ravenna these days. Then you ascend the Aventinus. Finally you have arrived in Region 13, your destination. And if you are a Rome fan like me and you are searching for a Christmas present, the Rota board game by the SPQR Shop might interest you. This ancient Roman game was found carved into countless stones all across the former Roman Empire, and now you can play as the Romans did, thanks to SPQR Shop. But SPQR Shop also builds replicas of many other Roman items such as rings, pendants, coins, attributes and terracottas. With my link in the description and pinned comment, and by typing in Maiorianus, you can get a 10% discount on every purchase. So don't hesitate, because this is high quality handcrafted stuff, which SPQR Shop is building itself. The perfect present for yourself or for somebody else you know that might be interested in Roman history. So now that you have finally ascended the Aventinus, one of the 7 hills of Rome, you see the Baths of Decius in their full glory. Honorius' restoration had paid off. They were in better shape than the Baths of Caracalla. You finally enter the courtyard of the baths, and even though these baths are less frequented, there are still quite a few people here. You wonder how it must have been in the old days when Rome's population was multiple times higher. How loud it must have been in the baths. How dirty the water must have been from all the people. The Romans in the old times would spend entire days there. People would come here, dining, meeting friends, playing games together, boxing, working out, throwing discuses in the outdoor courtyard. And so lastly you enter the Apoditerium. You undress, give your belongings to a slave, he puts them into a cubicle. You hope that nobody will steal it because there just aren't many slaves left to oversee the belongings. You then enter the main hall. At least one thing that Christianity had not changed. People are still naked. But of course men and women are separated. But how magnificent these baths still are, even after all that had happened. For whatever reason, these baths had not been despoiled by the barbarians of so many statues as the other thermae. They still resembled the baths of old. Maybe because they weren't as famous and as large as the others, you think? Let's start with the Caldarium, the warm steam room. You would have liked to make use of the Tepidarium, the medium temperature steam room, but you saw that it is closed, abandoned. Not all rooms are in use anymore. There just aren't enough slaves these days to maintain them, and the population of Rome is not large enough to have all rooms constantly in use. But the Caldarium is still being heated. For that somehow, they still find slaves somewhere apparently. A few others are with you in the Caldarium. The hot humid air has a nice fragrance of herbs. The temperature in such a Caldarium would have been anywhere from 40 to 50 degrees Celsius at an air humidity of almost 100%. The heating was achieved through a so-called hypocaust system, where hot air that was being heated through burning of coal was circulated in a space under the floor. After having visited the Caldarium, cooling off in the Frigidarium, one of several cold water pools, would be highly welcome. As you lie in the Frigidarium, you marvel at the still surprisingly vivid-looking mosaics and wall decorations. A statue was missing here. Guess the barbarians didn't miss this bath after all. Other people are in the Frigidarium as well. The water is pretty clear here. That is why you sometimes come all the way to these baths. Less people, cleaner water. It is not changed often anyways, and in the larger baths, even now with a reduced population, the water still is not so clean sometimes. Unknown to the Romans, the water pools of the ancient thermae were a perfect breeding environment for bacteria of any kind, and ironically the bathing culture, that was in many regards very good for the health, was the place which allowed the huge pandemics to spread fast throughout the entire Roman Empire. The Antonine Plague or the Cyprian Plague spread fast by the Roman road network and the bathing culture. After chatting a bit with some others in the Frigidarium, you go for a massage. A slave is rubbing oil into your skin, and afterwards you scrape it off with a strigil. Old habits don't die easily. And then another round in the Frigidarium. How good that all the aqueducts are still working, you think. These engineering marvels, built hundreds, nay, some even more than 800 years ago, still supplying Rome with water every single day. 19 of them you have counted since you live in Rome. The most imposing one, of course, being the Aqua Claudia, that incredible aqueduct, which at the base of the Palatine Hill rises over 30 meters high above the surrounding ground. Hopefully the aqueducts will still last another 800 years, you think to yourself. After musing about the miracle that are the aqueducts, you go into the courtyard. There are still some people working out there, but not anywhere as many as in the olden days. You can only guess at how it must have been. From here you can see that a wall has collapsed at one side of the thermae. That part is not in use anymore. I guess our Theodoricus cannot have everything repaired. The days of the empire where everything would be constantly repaired were gone after all. There is a spot here in the courtyard where one has a wonderful view over the entire city. From up above on the Aventine Hill, you can see over the Circus Maximus. You can see the imposing old palace of the Caesars, withered, crumbling in parts, but still very imposing. To the left in the distance, the Temple of Jupiter, weathered but still towering impressively over the city. From here, one would not guess that Rome's best days are behind it. The city still looks like an incredible marvel. Not many signs hint at the ravages that the city had to endure in the last century. Only some missing statues here, some damaged columns there. But from afar, this is not really visible. You have to look closely to find these damaged parts. The flame of Roma still shines brightly if you don't look too closely. Time to call it a day, you think to yourself. It was a nice day at the Thermae of Decius. You are glad to find that your belongings have not been stolen. Lucky day, you guess. You get dressed again and start your walk back home. Or that, dear friends of late Roman history, is at least how I imagine a day at the Aventine Baths in the year 520 AD. I hope you like this a bit different kind of video. If yes, please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting my work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. And I would like to thank William Weil for his generous PayPal donation. Thank you so much, William, for supporting this channel in such a generous way. Seriously, this channel would not work without our amazing Patreon and YouTube members, and I want to thank each and everyone who is supporting this channel in any form. Gratias tibiago, amici. And if you want to learn about how exactly the sacks of Rome in the 5th century had affected the city, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in learning when the city of Rome really fell, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.